Hi, my name is Elizaveta Nesterova and I'm a reporter at Mediazona. The number of political prisoners in Russia is growing by the day. Most of our efforts go to simply finding these people in prison, and sometimes other political prisoners help us with that. I'm going to tell you about a case like this today, about how we found Mikhail Simonov, a retiree who received a terrible sentence, an especially terrible sentence considering his age, for 2 anti-war posts in social media. Please like this video, share it, and subscribe to Mediazona's YouTube channel. My colleagues and I spend a lot of time tracking new criminal cases under popular political articles. We use a lot of different tools for this because not every case is publicly reported. Last winter, almost by accident, we came across a mention of 63-year-old Mikhail Simonov. At that time, we knew only one thing. He was in a pre-trial detention center charged with spreading fake news about Russian army. And this automatically made him a political prisoner. Then we went to the court hearing of Simonov's case and saw a confused elderly man who obviously did not fully understand what was happening. But he was trying his best to defend himself. And we also saw an appointment lawyer who openly sabotaged his defense. It became clear that Mikhail, who wasn't a public person, could not turn to human rights defenders, and he urgently needed a real lawyer. I found a lawyer quickly, but it took me over a month to find Mikhail in Moscow's detention centers. Usually, when you need to find a person knowing only the city where he was arrested, you just send letters to all the jails there. When a reply from person comes, you know where they're held. As it occurred, Mikhail Simonov was in Butyrka, a famous and very old jail in Moscow. But when I wrote to Butyrka, their response was that he wasn't held there. As I learned later, immediately after my letter came, Mikhail was suddenly told to gather up his few prison belongings and taken to another jail. Fortunately, it turned out to be the Vodnik pre-trial detention center, and there Mikhail was met by another political prisoner, Dmitry Ivanov, with whom I was also in touch. "Lisa, I found him," Dima wrote to me with joy. He knew that I had been searching for Simonov for the past weeks. Ivanov fondly called Simonov his comrade in charge. They were prosecuted under the same article of the Criminal Code, spreading fake news about the army. Simonov, who wasn't spoiled by other people's attention behind bars, gratefully accepted the support. But they met when the trial of Dima Ivanov was coming to an end. The prosecution asked for 9 years in prison for him. "Mikhail is 40 years older than me," Dima wrote. "He has been seriously ill for several weeks, he isn't sleeping well, and he doesn't have any hope for a better future. When he learned how much the prosecution is asking for me, he said that a term like this would mean a life sentence for him." When my first letter reached Mikhail asking if he would like another defense counsel, he replied instantly, "You have no idea how much I need a real lawyer, but I don't know where to get one." By that time, he had already changed 2 court-appointed lawyers. One had persuaded him to plead guilty, the other had simply pulled money out of him. As Simonov wrote to me, it was a 6-figure sum, although the attorney was obliged to work for free. I also asked another question. Would he be okay with me sending him something? I know that prison food is not good. "Lisa, is that the most important thing in my situation? Of course, the old man wouldn't mind some tobacco and sweets, but never mind, it's a little bit embarrassing," Mikhail wrote to me in a letter. He crossed out the phrase about sweets, but I could still make out what was written there. It took multiple attempts, but I was finally able to establish that he liked 2 things in jail: chocolate and books. At first, Mikhail was embarrassed, denied it, and even promised to return the money for the parcels after his release, sooner or later. But in the end, we fortunately able to overcome this embarrassment. From our correspondence, I also learned that Mikhail is originally from Voronezh, a city on the Volga River 300 miles south of Moscow. Before his arrest, he had lived with his wife in Belarus and had 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren. He was a railroad worker. He worked in a restaurant in a long-distance train and sometimes found himself passing through Moscow, where he did not even have a home. Between shifts, he slept either directly in carriage or at the home of his Moscow friends. He was taken from that apartment on November 9, 2022. Law enforcers broke in with a search, saw in the door with a bolt cutter. The reason for this were 2 posts of Mikhail on the social network ВКонтакте. He wrote them in March of 2022, in the first months of the full-scale war. Killing children and women, we sing songs on Channel 1. We, Russia, have become godless. Forgive us, Lord, read the first post. The second one had the words, Russian pilots are bombing children, above a photo of the Mariupol drama theater. Expert linguists on the prosecution side tried to find a so-called motive for the political hatred in the railway workers' post. They tried so hard that they even decided to examine his pre-war posts as well. For example, phrases like this: there is no forgiveness for Putin's crimes, or 2 tyrants agreed to destroy Belarus, and 4 other posts in which he criticized Putin and Lukashenko. As the prosecutions put it, 2 concerned citizens and social network users found this post. Their names were Anna Gell and Natalia Plotnikova. Not being acquainted with each other, they allegedly one day accidentally came across Mikhail Simonov's post discrediting the Russian armed forces. Without collusion, the 2 women decided to contact the investigative committee. As Anna Gell said during the interrogation, she doesn't like it when people publicly speak out against the authorities and the state. Plotnikova complained the investigators that she was annoyed by, I quote, the huge lump of liberalism on social media. In court, she cried and said that she didn't believe in the Russian army's crimes in Ukraine. It should be noted that it took 3 attempts to open the case against Simonov. Twice the investigator Tarasova refused to initiate the case due to the lack of corpus delicti in the actions of Simonov MU. And only when the bosses got tired of her persistence, the case was simply transferred to another investigator by the last name of Simonova. It was on her orders that Mikhail Simonov was searched and immediately after sent to a pre-trial detention center. The investigation and trial on his case took 4 months. In the spring of 2023, prosecutor Bogotyryova asked the court to sentence Mikhail to 7 years in prison, explaining that his post contained, I quote, not peace signs and flowers, but calls for the collapse of the Russian Federation. When Simonov heard the prosecutor's speech, at first his face changed, but he quickly pulled himself together and delivered a stunning closing statement. Among other things, he said, I have always believed, and I still believe, that human life has unconditional value and should be the first priority, although in our country they don't think so. But I was brought up this way. Let me give you a small example from my childhood, which I have always remembered. My mother was a little girl in besieged Leningrad. She told me how she took her dead parents on sledges along the Neva River to bury them. How she then experienced the terrible Great Patriotic War, the World War, and hoped that this was the last war. I still have these words in my head from a song or something. My darling, if there were no war, Mom used to say that too. The court was not moved by these words, and on March 30, 2023, Simonov was sentenced to 7 years in prison, exactly as requested by the prosecutor's office. After the verdict, it was a difficult transfer to the penal colony in Покров, Vladimir region, 70 miles from Moscow. Simonov was taken there were Nizhny Novgorod and Chuvashia. But there were good things too. Mikhail, like 4 other Russian political prisoners, was awarded the Boris Nemtsov Prize for courage in defending democratic rights and freedoms. Dozens of people wrote to him with words of support. Volunteers have collected donations for him. European students know about his case and have even organized events in his support. And in January this year, the Court of Cassation was generous enough to commute his sentence by as much as 6 months to 6.5 years in a penal colony. It is obviously very hard for 64-year-old Simonov in prison. You can sometimes feel despair in his letters. He writes that he tries to withdraw into a shell. On days like this, he often dreams of his train, his restaurant car, and the railway. Mikhail began to compose poetry in prison. It's very gloomy. He writes about the black sun outside his window, black robes on people around him, and the black bird that calls for him. He says, "Prison has already settled inside me." He really needs support, and one of the best ways to do this is to write letters to him and other political prisoners. Please note, you can only write in Russian, otherwise prison centers won't let the letter through. Our friends and colleagues at Human Rights Group OVD-Info launched a special service that helps English speakers to do this. It's called Lifeline. You can find a link to it in the description to this video. Thank you for watching.